all the beginning bit for you.
Alrighty. Okay. I think hopefully does that look okay
Yeah,
to
that's
you?
Yep.
perfect. Absolutely great. And just remember the
So
arrows are quite, just to move it, you go down to the bottom left, just to move your slide.
I'll
So
just
if you,
test that.
yeah,
Bottom
test it
left.
now. Yeah, but
Look
if you
now.
put your cursor at the bottom left of that slide, little grey arrows will appear.
Ah,
There,
I
yeah,
see. Got
because you
you.
sometimes miss them and you think,
Okay.
what? Where are they?
Got them. That's fine.
Yeah, so
Okay. So we're ready to go and
yeah, that's us at 3 o'clock. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us in our Measurement and Inclusive Growth and the High Operating Plan webinar. This is the second one that we've done. The first one was a real roaring success, and we hope that this one will be as engaging for you. We're going to record the webinar, and we're also going to be using Slido as just one way of getting your engagement. I'll put all the details into the chat. So we've got a lot to get through. So let's hand over to Martin. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Good afternoon, everybody. Andy, would you move us on to the first slide? So a wee bit of chalk and talk today. And then I'm going to talk, Andy's going to talk, and then we'll stop for Q&A, and then it'll be Evan, and then Q&A. So it is, to an extent, interactive, and as Jaya has said, either use Slido or the chat to come in with thoughts and questions. So, two related things we're going to talk about today. Once I shut up, Andy's going to take us through how we've refreshed our approach to what we have been calling our fragile areas map. We've been calling it fragile areas for over 20 years. So we have, as Andy will take us through, refreshed that, and we've got a new set of maps, and we'll talk about the so what of that as we go. It's probably helpful to say now that when we did this strategy, when we were out consulting last year, then we were talking about, our use of fragile areas. There was some resistance. There was some negative connotation around about fragile. So through the work Andy's going to take us through, we'll talk about it, but we're not calling them fragile areas anymore. We don't talk about fragile areas in our strategy. We don't talk about them in our operating plan, and because of that feedback, but we're calling inclusive growth focus areas. And again, it is the so what of that matters. So Andy's going to take us through that methodology. The methodology is important. No one's expecting you to pass a test on it. It's not that kind of methodology. But when we get to the so what of that, then Evan's going to take us through our measures. So what are we measuring this year, and what are the quantums against that? Colleagues will have seen, and certainly we'll see this afternoon, and we'll see going forward, that how we're presenting our measure, how we're presenting our targets, many of the headline measures are split. They're split to say what we want to do in these inclusive growth focus areas. We're being very explicit about what we want to do, but we're also using the measures to be very explicit about some of the other things that we want to do that are, if you will, cross-cutting themes. So things like community wealth building, things like net zero, things like inclusive growth. But the measures also set out where we are looking to focus, what our priorities are. So things like innovation and things like productivity, we're still measuring and setting targets against jobs, but it's very much about the quality of those jobs. And things like productivity, innovation, and the quality of jobs are the key factors that will help us progress the economy, make this a region that is very attractive for people to stay and for people to come. So we'll go through all of that. So that's me set the scene. So we're going to go to Andy. There'll be a chance when Andy's finished to do some Q&A around about the inclusive growth focus areas, then we'll go on to Evan and another chance. So we'll make it as interactive as we can. And Jaya's put the Slido into the chat. So colleagues, please feel free to put comments in the chat or into Slido. Right, enough for me, over to Andy.
Okay, thanks very much, Martin. I'm going to introduce our new inclusive growth model and the inclusive growth focus areas that Martin's just referred to. First of all, just to say that High strategy makes very clear the imperative associated with increasing geographic targeting to more disadvantaged areas to support inclusive growth. And in this context, it describes the importance of flexing the criteria for support to stimulate demand where that's needed. It describes a need for implementing new approaches to monitoring and evaluating our contribution to inclusive growth and the well-being economy. And it describes the need for better support for resource prioritization. So to satisfy these requirements and others mentioned here on the slide, 2 new tools have been developed. Now, these tools are the product of a good deal of work over the last few years, evolving over that period to reach the point of gaining approval with the LT and last week from the High Board for putting the new inclusive growth focus areas into practice. So the main tool for geographic prioritization within High for over 20 years now has been the fragile areas designation, last updated in 2014. It's well established and its binary sort of in-out classification is pretty simple to understand. However, it lacks nuance, it lacks flexibility, and is also utilizing data that is now out of date as well. Fragile areas language also received fairly negative feedback during the strategy consultations, so there's no use of it in High's strategy document. An alternative approach can now provide a better fit using alternative indicators and more recent data. So both of these new tools involve deriving scores for each of 34 sub-areas across the region. These sub-areas nest inside the areas covered by area teams and were originally developed quite a while back to approximate functional local economies. The first tool scoring is based around indicators of economic welfare and demographic conditions. A range of possible indicators were narrowed down through a rigorous analytical process to arrive at the 6 that are listed here on the slide, which were then considered by senior managers in terms of the relative importance that should be assigned to each one. Percentages you can see here on the slide represent the weighting that was given to each in that scoring process. So income deprivation, for example, has the greatest influence in the scoring, and employment rate has the least. Now, the second tool scoring was originally just based around household income. Household income equivalized to account for different household compositions. However, internal discussions concluded that household income should be adjusted to account for cost of living, given that while some areas may appear to be more affluent using household income alone, higher than average costs mean that the standard of living experienced by residents is not necessarily higher. So cost of living is factored into Tool 2 based on costs under the 7 key headings that you can see listed on the slide there. Scoring the sub-areas using both tools and looking at those areas that fall below average, so are relatively more disadvantaged, according to either tool, results in the map that you can see on the right of this slide. And for comparison, the old fragile area map is presented on the left there. So clearly the new map covers a larger land area and a larger share of the region's population than the fragile map. One of the main reasons for this difference is that the fragile map explicitly excluded remote small towns, such as Stornoway, Campbelltown, and others. And many of these towns face challenges highlighted by the new tools, particularly in relation to income deprivation and working age population decline. And including these remote small towns recognises that intervention and investment in the wider sub-area can benefit residents both in remote small towns and vice versa. So these towns account for 10% of the region's population, and therefore represent a sizable chunk of the 33% covered by the new map there. So the new inclusive growth focus area map we've been looking at is a simple binary in-out map, just as the fragile area one was. However, the new model can be flexed to provide much more nuanced picture if required. For example, the threshold for disadvantage can be adjusted so that those areas that are more challenged or most challenged can be readily identified. The reasons for the inclusion of any given area on the map can also be identified and used potentially to influence prioritization for different types of intervention. There's also flexibility in terms of the geographies used. Scoring and maps are available right down to the level of 600 to 630 data zones, small area geographies that make up the region. And this means that even though they don't feature on the sub-area map, both Murray and IMF could make use of the model to support prioritization for certain types of intervention, as the data zone maps reveal pockets of disadvantages in those areas as well. The scoring will also be used to weight the investment and output associated with any given intervention so that High can articulate its contribution to inclusive growth in the round for the year. So I'll maybe leave it there just now, but I'm happy to take any questions on any of this before we move on to look at measures and targets with Evan.
If you've got a question, just use your raised hand or pop it into the chat. No new questions, Andy,
No
just the ones
questions
that
for the
we
moment?
already got at the moment, but we can gather everything up at the end and take all the questions that we've already had submitted as well.
Okie doke, that's fine. I will stop sharing here just now and let Evan take over the slide deck.
Thank you. So hopefully you can now see key measures and target ranges.
Yep, we're fine, thanks.
Excellent. So we've got new targets for this year, and you'll hopefully now be aware of the new area targets that have also been set. Just to remind everyone that whilst we refer to them as area targets, they are not only for area teams. All outputs from any team can contribute to an area outcome as long as it's as long as the postcode's correct on the intervention. And we'll get into that later. But just to preface this with, this counts for everyone. It's not just area targets. So just to give a bit of a background on how the targets came about, the modelling was based on a combination of historic data, which was looking at historic performance compared to the value of approvals, as well as any approvals from client actions that might be delivering further performance. So that's to get an idea of what we've managed in the past and the budget that delivered that. Obviously, it's a different budget every year. So we take into account what we've got to work with this year. We have a look at any big outliers that are on the horizon. This year, obviously, the growth deals are coming up. So we had to make sure that we'd accounted for them. And also any shifts in focus, such as from the strategy, which has put innovation and productivity very much at the forefront, along with net zero. So some of these targets have had to also be adjusted to reflect that raised importance. So there may also be some limited historic information. Again, some things have only recently hit the radar. Net zero has only really been part of measurement for the last couple of years. And the same could be said of productivity. So we have had to make some adjustments. Lastly, before we get into the targets themselves, I would like to remind you that it's been agreed that they can be more rigorously appraised at the half-year point. That can include adjusting ranges in either direction to make sure that that balance is maintained for them to be both realistic and ambitious, and also to review the collection of tracking measures to make sure that we're highlighting the right things. So all of this is done in the scope of the new strategy. So moving into what the targets are. High's new targets have been agreed. There are a few new subjects that we've just covered. So we've got the new inclusive growth focus areas, which you'll see littered throughout the targets. And again, as Martin just commented, these are to make sure that the benefit is felt across and more evenly across the region. So as I said, we've raised to the profile of certain topics. We've got productivity has become much more prominent within the targets, along with innovation, which has now more explicitly reached the targets. Net zero remains a key area. Community development has also been brought to the fore, and as we just covered, there's these inclusive growth areas. So I'd like to take some time to step through the targets, explain them, because whilst it might look like there'd be a whole new host of outputs to acquaint yourselves with, there are no new outputs. We've just worked on new ways of deriving these, so hopefully there shouldn't really be too much extra work for yourself. It's just to continue doing the good work, and the targets should come out of it, hopefully. So to start off with, there's a target for number of organisations increasing productivity. This uses the same method as last year, and I'll just run through how that works to remind you. The output will generate an expected increase in productivity, and I'm more than happy to go into how these individual outputs work, but conscious of time, and we can perhaps circle back to that as in the questions, because I'm aware there's a couple of questions about that. So as long as you've got an expected output that's positive against that client will be counted in the target. And it's as simple as that for the number of organizations increasing productivity. The next up is the average increase in productivity. And this is going to take every case where that same output is used, and it's going to take a mean of that expected output. And then the target is to aim for about 15%. At the moment, that's looking achievable, but as we've seen with the average wage, that in the past that can be swung in either direction, depending on a big project coming through. Next up, we've got the innovation section. So none of these are necessarily new, but you may not have seen them if it's not the space that you're commonly in. So there's an output already in the system for a number of organizations supported to innovate, and that uses just the standard method of entry. As long as you've got it preferably deduplicated, don't want to double count, you can use all the same methods that you're currently using to record that, and it will be brought through as long as you use that output. The same method it applies for number of new products, processes, or services. Again, you might not have seen it before, but there is an output in the system available for that, and the guidance will point you in the direction of which priorities you need your project tagged with to have it. Now into the new and exciting, well, I say exciting, maybe that's just my nerdy side coming out, methods of getting the targets together. There's the innovation investment in supported organizations. It's brand new, and it's got a new way of being gathered. All you need to do is make sure that the themes are spot on. So the reporting will check the primary and major themes of each intervention, and if it's got innovation or R&D recorded against it, we'll bring through the total project cost into that. And that's all you need to do to make sure that your project is contributing to that target. Next up, we've got the number of organizations supported to develop or implement, that's the new language, net zero action plans. You can use the exact same output that was used last year, which was about developing net zero action plans, but there's a a growing expectation that these action plans don't just get written and put in a box, they get put into action as the client embeds their net zero strategy. Another new target, number of community-led projects supported. It's gathered in a brand new way as well. The method for this is as long as the intervention has a measure against it, and the client's organization type is social enterprise or social enterprise anchor, it will be brought through and counted. And that's all you have to do. You just have to keep doing that good work with communities. On to the number of jobs supported. Now, the number of jobs supported measure, the green jobs supported measure, and the average jobs supported measure, they're all gathered in the same way as before. You'll need to use the number of jobs supported FTE output, or if you're in the uncommon position of working in inward investment, that also has a method as well. But I'm sure you'll be aware if that's necessary. Just make sure that the green jobs is selected as yes, if that's the case. The new ones for these, though, are the subsets for focus areas. Now, for these, again, you just need to make sure that the postcodes for the intervention is in a focus area. And that's all that you need to do on your side. The reports will bring it in and make sure that it's shown up against those. And just to be clear, they're subsets. You don't need to record additional ones for them to pop up on the other targets as well. And the same sort of approach has been taken with external investment secured. Again, we've got the outputs for non-green and green. Those are summed up to make the external investment secured. And please also read this in as capital asset investment as well, because it's the exact same method. As long as you use one of those, it will pop up in the total target, and then the green version will show up in the explicitly green target as well. They'll also both show up in the version of them for supported in focus areas, as long as that postcode is correct and puts it in a focus area. And lastly, again, for community organizations, as long as that organization type is set to social enterprise or social enterprise anchor, it will be coming through for that. So as you can probably see, not too much has changed. It might look like a substantial new set of targets, but it's all using everything that you're used to anyway. So I'd like to take a chance to go through some steps that we can use to ensure the performance data is as accurate as possible. It's really important because this performance data is the key way that we can show the value of High's work. It's how we show Scottish Government and other parties that they got value for their money. We meet fairly regularly with business units managers to go over the approvals and pre-approvals that they've got in the system. It's not just for fun, it's to check in on any issues that we see or things that we just don't understand because we're not as close to the project as some are. And it's a chance for us to pass on any updates about performance management. And also we make sure to have these bilaterals before any reviews are done with Stuart, because it's best to get the kinks ironed out beforehand. Now, it might seem a bit overkill, but it's to save everyone time and effort and to try and solve these recurring issues going forwards, because whilst it can be fairly straightforward to edit a pre-approved project, once you get into amendments, it's taking time and effort away from more useful tasks and, frankly, far more enjoyable tasks. So I'd just like to go over a few common pitfalls, and I'd like to start with a classic, which is missing current and base case. In some cases, this won't really have too much of an effect, but the base case and the forecast are key to showing the effect that High has had. Everyone's great with the forecast because we all know what we want the clients to end up achieving, but it's making sure that we have the current and base case to show where they were and also what chunk of their achievement is due to High's involvement. Now, this can have a small effect if it's just number of organizations and it's the difference of one or two. But it can have quite substantial effects in the case of jobs, where you might be moving from, for argument's sake, 50 jobs to 60 jobs in a particular role, and everything looks fine. number of jobs is set at 50, but suddenly you've missed the hours and the FTE calculation thinks that you've gone from 0 jobs to 60 jobs, which looks great on paper, but obviously is wrong, and then it's straight into amendment with that sort of thing. And it gets also quite complex with productivity, given the number of steps in that. And again, I'm happy to go through how that works later on. And turnover in sales, which will sum up the gross effect that you've had on turnover over 3 years. So suddenly it can have quite a drastic effect. For investment, going back to the targets, you saw that there were targets for external investment secured and external green investment secured. Really important to make sure that if it's all green for a project, don't worry about recording it for the regular version as well. We'll make sure it's summed up in the targets at the end. No need to do extra work. As we're looking at a substantially increased measurement framework for this strategy, I had been thinking of having a poll for how many outputs do you think are on the framework at the moment. There's a lot that High's working on, but that means that we can risk getting the wrong outputs. One of the ones I've noticed lately is the difference between employment opportunities and supported jobs. Sounds roughly the same. One's to do with potential employment and one's to do with helping people get past barriers to employment. And so there's a lot that can be hidden behind the name. So very important to make sure that you've gone through the guidance. There's a full list of definitions at the end of that document, and there'll be a little demo at the end to show you how to find all this information. Also, not using a full set of outputs and activities. I'm aware it can be a bit of a pain getting a complete set, but as I've said before, it's all about showing the value of what High does. So even if it seems like extra work and you can't see the benefit, please rest assured it's all being gathered up and used to demonstrate the value of High's work. So do please, even if it's not in the targets, that doesn't mean it's not important. That just means we've not raised it as a target. And there's absolutely someone out there who's interested in it, potentially with a pot of money for approvals, which is obviously the dream. So don't make extra work for yourself, but please do make sure that you've got the full set of measures and that they're the right measures. We are, of course, more than happy to take a call at any time to go through. It might be that you want to see whether you can find some extra measures to add on. You're not certain that you've got everything. It might be that you're not sure how some of the measures work, because some of them can be quite complex if you're not used to doing it day in, day out. So please do just reach out if you need a pointer on that. Now, we've also got a brand new set of reports steadily being churned out. This one is the outcome summary, which will show you all the performance against the targets. And whilst I could talk at length about this, I'd prefer to show you how to find it, and then we can talk at length about it. So just to bring a fresh screen across, hopefully you can see the intranet. Andy, could you give me a nod if you can see it?
We can.
Yeah, we're fine.
Fantastic. So from the intranet, scrolling all the way down, you can find a link to the measurement guidance. The document is going to be updated. There was a copy released at the start of this calendar year, and a new one is set to be released next month, assuming it goes through the process change group. Other than that, you can find dashboard reporting. Dashboards will show summarized information, useful for a quick glance and to check that everything looks about right. You can find more detailed reports under Power BI management reports, and that's where you might find things at the level of a table with a row per intervention, or in the case of performance measurement, if you're particularly fascinated, a row per output or a row per activity. But we'll stick with dashboard reporting for now. It's far more useful and certainly much more appealing to look at. So I've clicked through on the dashboard summary, and we can see the outcome summary by area dash. At the moment, you'll see the headings area target. These are all highs targets, and that's because geographic area is set to all. If I want to see the targets for a specific area, and I do hope I'm not picking on anyone, but so I won't. Yeah, I'll do it. I'm sure Maura will forgive me if she's here. You can see that the targets are automatically adjusted, and that will show the targets for that area. Now, you don't need to do any extra work for yourself going through and selecting business units to make sure that everyone's included. As long as you select the area that you're interested in, it will bring in everything that's happened in that area and the targets that are associated with it. If you want to look at what's in the pipeline, you can either select all and just untick approved, and that will show you everything that's coming through. For us, when we're putting together reports to comment on the pipeline, we'll usually look at awaiting approval. That's anything that, as I'm sure you're aware, is awaiting approval. That sort of speaks for itself. And then there's advanced and planned, which are the steps that we'll usually look at. You might think that there's something in aspirational that's particularly worth raising. And if ever you hear that your team has a report coming up, do shout if you want something highlighted. But we'll typically compile it for advanced, planned, and awaiting approval. And we use that as a gauge for there's a decent level of confidence in these interventions. So here we can see the pipeline for all of high. Again, we could slice that by geographic area. And again, you would see the targets and can adjust each of these in any way that we like. And we can also drill through. So if I wanted to see what might be coming up for all high in terms of organizations supported to innovate, I could drill through. That's right-clicking on the target. Then I go down to drill through and drill through detail. And then this will show me a table which has everything that might be coming through for number of organizations supported to innovate. And there we have it. I'm sure we'll be more than happy to take questions just now.
Evan, there's a question specifically for you from Natalie Campbell. Did you say whether it had to be a major theme, innovation and stroke R&D, or can it be either a major or minor theme?
Sorry, it has to be either major or primary for it to appear in innovation investment. I assume that's what Natalie was asking about.
Yes, that's what I meant. Thank you.
No problem. Yes, minor won't be included for this, but do please use it if it's relevant. There are certainly uses for it, just not for that target.
Okay, you can see in the chat that the team have been answering some of the Slido questions already. Now, there's plenty of ways that you would get you involved. If you would prefer just to put your hand up and come off mute, then we're happy for that. If you want to just put something in the chat. What I'll do is we were running a poll about how often that you use the guidance. So I'm just sharing my screen and you can actually see the poll there. So at the moment, it's changing all the time. 29% have never used it. Sometimes 29%, occasionally 24%, and all the time 19%. So I'll stop sharing that poll just now. So let's see if we've answered all the questions. We had a question about, Lorna's answered a question about social enterprise, SOC category actually. Let's see if we've covered that. Keith was having a problem with the link, but everyone else could get into it. Keith, I've put the EDRMS link in there. If you've got problems, then we can take that offline.
Oh, got it now, thank you.
That is good. There was a question about what was the reason for the rollback. Lorna's answered it to say in the operating plan, jobs are in the key measures and not the tracking measures. But with everything that you've heard, whether it be anything that Martin said or Andy or Evan, this is your chance to either use the chat or just come off. And Martin, is there anything that you want to add that has arisen from those questions? Is there anything that you can make it easier for folk?
No, I don't. Well, I don't think so. I guess what we're talking about, well, there's the targets and the measures, or the measures and targets that Evan has taken us through. I think it's maybe more, Andy took us through, how we've refreshed in the old money that I'll use for just now, but it's not language I'm going to use. It's the fragile areas map, and it's the so what of that. So I had a discussion yesterday at senior managers with area managers, and based on the measures and the targets, clear ask is to literally go out and find projects, find customers that we can work with that will give us targets. The board and Stuart leadership team were really keen that we use the new map to be seen to be making the difference that we're kind of here to do in the fragile areas. It's also worthwhile saying that there are two documents colleagues need to have in their minds: operating plan, what we're talking about today, and particularly the measures and the targets, but also the strategy document, which is there for 5 years. And the strategy document sets out across people, place, planet, and prosperity what we're trying to achieve, what are the actions we need to take, and what are the outcomes that we expect. So things like population, things like housing and childcare and working with communities are to an extent captured in the measures, but a lot of the activity that we expect the organization to do are kind of informed by the strategy. And one of the so whats of the new map of inclusive growth focus areas is, again, we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. There's lots of good examples, but let us identify those places and those communities that we can work with to help them with population, with housing, with childcare. What are the transport? What are the digital issues? So that's a key part of what Andy was talking about that hasn't necessarily been captured by what Andy has been talking about. So bear in mind the strategy, what it's there to do, as well as the operating plan and the targets. And the narrative of the operating plan also sets out very clearly some of these broader things that we're looking to do.
Thanks. Same question to you, Andy. Is there anything, having had a look at some of the topics that are coming up in the chat, that you could maybe elaborate on, or any key messages that you want to leave our audience with everything that you presented in a nutshell?
Thanks, Joe. I'm not sure there's much more, but I would invite people to come forward later with any further questions about the inclusive growth focus areas, or indeed the measures, targets. Anyone in the team would be happy to discuss those. But there's nothing else. I didn't want to. There's a lot more behind the mapping and the way it's been done. I didn't want to. So it's a lot to take in a short space of time. So I didn't want to include too much, but very happy to expand on that. And indeed, there's the leadership team paper and the board paper that goes into a little bit more detail if people are interested a little bit more in understanding what's behind the tools. But nothing really more than that just now, Jay. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Before we come to Evan, Lorna's highlighted that someone was asking about how productivity increase is measured. Although it's in the guidance, could we touch on that now, please?
Yeah, productivity is measured. It's an output measure in the framework that's available in MyHigh. Can be used with any intervention. What it does is it requires the entry of turnover and cost of sales and number of FTE employees in the organization. And the simple calculation that's made to work out the productivity is the turnover less cost of sales divided by the number of FTE employees. System does that. It just requires the data to be entered, and it'll do the calculation. It then returns both a turnover less cost of sales as a proxy for gross value added, GVA. So it's really GVA per employee in the organization. And then it expresses the difference between the position the client would have been without our involvement and the position the client's in with our involvement, expresses that difference as a percentage. And that helps, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not sure who asked the question, actually.
Thanks very much for that. Lorna's also put in a little bit more as well. And we've got a comment in from Slido just saying that happy that it's been clarified what we actually put into our measures. Evan, I'm going to come to you now. I know you were last to present, but is there anything having looked at the chat and heard some of the conversation that you think you would like to emphasise or just summarise in a nutshell for the audience, please?
Really, just to second Andy's point that we're here to help with measurement and in its many forms. Please do just reach out if you if there's any questions that are outstanding, or if anything comes up afterwards. That's all I'm here for.
Audrey has put into the chat the link for the productivity calculator details. That's the DRMS link. So thanks for us. And another question's come in, and it's from Keith. Keith, do you want to come off mute? Or are you happy for me just to read out your question?
Read it out.
Okay, okay. I always think it's more human. You read out your own question. I think it's much nicer.
Okay, I'll do that. We're just looking for an update on the whole issue of attribution for projects that we've just had an instrumental effect in bringing about, NFIs or whatever. We've just done a loan from SE, for example. What can we attribute to High's activity without double counting what SE would be counting? Or do we not worry about SE?
No, we do, Keith. We're obliged to understand to the best of our ability what other public sector organisations are counting within joint initiatives, so that we can avoid double counting across the public sector. That's quite fundamental for us if we can ascertain that. So it's really just liaison with the colleagues in other partner agencies, really, to understand what they're recording. Not always straightforward, I know, but we have to endeavour to do our best on that so that we don't double count across the public sector. I'm not sure that answers your question, does it? Or
well, it does. It's exactly what I thought was the case. But we have been encouraged to use NFIs and claim everything we possibly can under NFIs. And if we haven't put any money in, I mean, under the previous arrangements, if say there were 100 jobs created and we'd put in 50% of the money and somebody else had put in 50%, we would claim 50 jobs.
Yes.
If we haven't put in any money, but we've simply helped them to arrange a loan, say from another partner organisation, what can we claim? Because they'll be claiming the whole thing.
If indeed they are, I would argue that we should be negotiating with them, because the efforts of our staff is an injection of resource in the same way that money is an injection of resource. So I would suggest that we would negotiate with our partner there to find an equitable division in the output.
Okay, we'll give it a go. Thank you, Andy.
Martin, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I think two things. So that there is in the measurement guidance, well, strange enough, guidance on NFIs, but also there are, particularly the Murray team, are excellent at how they capture NFIs on on the system and how they evidence that. So if you haven't, Keith, certainly have a good catch up with Angie and the team. As I said, from what I'm aware, the Murray team do it. It's really good, and it's a sort of thing that we'd be looking to you and the KFMS team to really to replicate. So we do that because there's so much that we do that is about our knowledge, our contacts, our experience and support that we give that stops short of financial, that we need to be better at getting credit for and attribution for. So that's the two things I would say. Speak to Angie and the team and have a look at the measurement guidance, because it's really important that we and you get credit for the things that we do that are not financial.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Now, I know that Evan has come in and said, absolutely second Andy's point. High staff are a valuable resource, and that is what client actions with measurements are there to represent. So thanks for that, Evan. Now, a new question's come in from Slido, and it's around about new product processes or services and when we're classing them as innovative. Will the measurement guidance have a definition of when a new product or process or service is classified as innovative?
Yes, in short, yes, that is absolutely being worked up. There was a definition previously, but with the raised profile of it in the target, it obviously needs to be as foolproof as possible.
Okay, that's great. Now we've got 15 minutes left. If you need your 15 minutes to ask more questions or come in off mute, then please do. If you are happy with what you've had, and we will be sharing the slides with you. We realise that there's a lot of detail in them, and it's something that you'll want to look at. And how important to the team is it that we absolutely know this inside out, Martin?
It is really important that staff have a good knowledge of the measures and what constitutes a measure, because that guides what they're doing. So what's difficult to do and probably is fruitless is to set out what are we not going to do. So quite often people say, well, what are we going to stop doing? Well, what we set out is what we should be doing. So if what you're working on easily aligns with the measures and how we evidence that, and you know it is a judgment for what value for money is, then great, do it. If what you're working on doesn't easily fit into the measures, then I think you need to have a conversation with your line manager and or area manager or director about, actually, is this something that we should still be continuing? Because the likelihood is no. So that's why it's really useful. It makes sure that we're working on what we're supposed to be working, what we've set out as an organization, as a board and an executive to do in a strategy, and what we're trying to do this year. So that really helps. And there is, speak to your colleagues, use the measurement guidance, and pick up the phone or headset and speak to Andy or Evan or any of the team. We're delighted to try and help. Even better if we can help, but we were always delighted to try and help.
What is the best way to contact the team if someone has questions? How do you prefer people contact you? Because it's quite a small team. What's your preference?
Andy, answer that.
I would.
Right.
You could contact any of us individually. We're happy to take calls. If it's to do with reporting, there's a specific mailbox, this corporate reporting help desk. So if it's to do with that specifically, you can contact the team through that. But really, if it's a measurement query, then myself, Evan, or Heather would do our best to help individually. And there's Lorna and Alison as well, who'd be able to help with particular queries too. So we're really, any of us are there and available to take calls if you've got any queries.
Okay, you'll be glad, Andy, Martin and Evan, that you're shortly going to be off the hot seat, but not before I give you a question each. Andy, what's the best thing about the new measurement guidance in one word?
Well, the best thing about the new measurement guidance, well, I think it's more fulsome than it's ever been. Frankly, I think it's probably got the best descriptions, definitions of the measures that there has been before. There's been quite a lot of work gone into it over the last year. We're very aware that it does need updated to accommodate the new targets and the definitions around those. And we're like Evan said, we're planning on launching the new version early next month. But really, I think, Jay, it's an iteration from previous versions, but I think it's the most comprehensive that it's been to date.
Thank you very much. Evan?
Gosh, it's this same question.
In 1,000 words.
Right. I think to second Andy's point, but also well, for me, it was the first time I saw the whole thing through from the start of a new strategy. It's really pleasing to see how we can, using that set of measures, reflect as much as possible of High's strategy. Obviously, before I step on any other toes, there's a ton of evaluation work that needs to happen after, but it hopefully provides our best possible way of showing from the get-go what we're doing to further the region.
Thanks. And Martin?
I had the question, so one answer, clarity, and if you'd allow me to focus.
Thank you very much. Listen, you've heard the message, everyone. The team are there, very willing to help. You now know where the guidance is. Just keep that. If you've got a question, just get in touch with the team. And I'd just like to thank the team very much for putting on this webinar. We will have the recording on the intranet. We'll share the slides. And if there's anything, get in touch with them direct. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And we hope to see you soon. Thanks very much now.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.